which dead celebrities are treated like saints, but were truly awful people when they were alive. Pablo Picasso was an abusive, raging narcissist who sucked the life out of people around him. His muses were generally young women he would domineer and destroy. Steve Jobs was an asshole to his family. His own kids hated him. His wife only stayed for the money. He also was known for throwing work colleagues under the bus to cover his own ass and taking credit for things he didn't invent. He also smelled like shit in the icing on the cake. He was such a self-centered fuckface that he refused treatment for pancreatic cancer for 9 months because his special diet of only like apples or some shit would cure him. I find it hilarious that such a supposed genius died by being so stupid. Edit. Jobs had a rare form of pancreatic cancer where it is curable with a 90% success rate. I read someplace in order to get into character Ashton Kutcher followed that fruitarian diet, and shortly after being on it had intense pancreatic pain that led to a hospital trip. Never too early to say Alan is evil. I have met her a few times, and I dated a guy who worked on her show for a few years. All the stories you hear in the press about her being an awful, mean, cold-hearted person are all true. There is many interviews on her own show where she treats the guests badly. She is mean, and actually gets a rise out of making people uncomfortable and embarrassed, and she sees nothing wrong with it. It's her own show where she has her own free-ride control. If you watch her interview with Dakota Johnson, she is absolutely horrible, but the interview still aired that way cause Alan saw nothing wrong with the way she spoke to Dakota. I know a guy whose cousin was on her show is one of those like genius kids. She supposedly gave them a trip to Disney World, but never actually followed through. Anytime they tried to contact the studio about it, they were ignored. Imagine promising a kid live on television a trip to Disney World and then stiffing them. That's cold-hearted. Poor kid. Was not John Lennon an abusive husband? Also abusive to his son. He absolutely hates when people tell him how awesome or cool his dad was. Thomas Edison, literally one of the biggest pieces of shit, stole patents, stomped out competitors with physical force and violence, electrocuted an elephant to mislead the public his inferior power grid was less dangerous than Nikola Tesla's, and a lot more. My mother, who was a young adult during Bing Crosby's peak, said that he was a horrible husband and father, a serial philanderer and violent. John Lennon was a drug addict, a pathological liar, a woman beater, and he abandoned his family. He did all this while singing about peace and love, which makes him a hypocrite to boot. Alfred Hitchcock was really terrible. I scrolled way too far to see this one. I am still haunted by the story of him giving a stagehand a laxative and handcuffing into a chair overnight. Bing Crosby, years ago, while watching Blue Skies with him and Fred Astaire, my dad gushed over Astaire's legacy. I asked what Bing was like and he said, besides beating his wife and kids, what a voice! Can't watch anything with him in it now. He was a monster to anyone close to him. Frank Sinatra, my grandpa's girlfriend and her husband used to work for him, and he was a right bastard. Didn't think that he had to pay people that work for him. Treated employees bad. All the usual human stuff. Sinatra saved my life once. His bodyguards were stomping me, and he said, "Boys, that's enough." Frank Lloyd Wright abandoned his wife and children to take a mistress, who was herself already married. He drove his butler insane, and the guy ended up killing Wright's mistress and her kids, burned down his studio, and committed suicide by drinking acid. Wright was not there at the time. Wright's response to this was to rebuild the studio exactly as it was before, supposedly to honor his mistress and their children. But it was pretty obvious to people at the time that he just wanted to protect his legacy as an architect, as many of his most famous innovations were showcased in the design. Sure enough, it became the museum to his work and is still visited today. I hate saying it because I used to really like him, but on two occasions, Paul Walker dated 16-year-old girls, once when he was 28. And again when he was 32. This was all while he had a young daughter of his own. The age of consent in California is 18, meaning if he did anything sexual with them, he could have been charged and indicted on statutory rape. I guess being a predator is okay, though, if you are really good looking. I have not seen Michael Landon's name come up yet. He did amazing on Little House on the Prairie, but apparently he was actually a raging alcoholic and even his own kids made a documentary about the father I knew. This was the one I was looking for. Michael Landon played wise, kindly characters on TV, like Charles Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie and Jonathan, a literal angel in Highway to Heaven, and a lot of people seem to think he really was actually that saintly in real life. And he could be quite kind sometimes. He adopted his first wife's children and initially treated them like his own kids, even though he was barely 12 years older than the oldest boy, but he had a cruel, almost sociopathic side too. He eventually left his first wife and married someone else, which isn't that unusual in Hollywood. He adopted his second wife's daughter, and initially treated her the same as his biological kids, which he had several of. However, he then left second wife and family for a much younger woman who worked on the Little House set, and then he publicly stated that he never really loved his second wife, which absolutely broke his children's hearts. He then told his kids that if they didn't accept his new wife with open arms, he would have nothing to do with them. He had 2 kids with his third wife and left the bulk of his estate to them, and very little to any of the kids from his previous relationships. I have worked for Prince, and it's a not-so-hidden secret he was absolutely awful to work with. There used to be a saying, you are nobody in this industry until you have been fired by Prince. He is a legend for sure, but was awful to those who put the show on, and his ego was out of control, and when it came down to it, he died from an OD. So for someone who was so quick to fire anyone over a simple mistake, and he's so critical of weakness, it turns out he had some hidden weaknesses of his own. Also, from all accounts, Jim Morrison was an awful person. Johnny Carson. He cheated on his wives and was an all-around prick when he was not on camera. The most widely known example was him telling Joan Rivers that she would never become the star of The Tonight Show. She was the permanent guest host at the time, then refusing to ever speak to her again after she got a job elsewhere. Didn't U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy once kill his assistant while driving? Dr. Seuss had an affair for years while his wife battled cancer, drove her to suicide, married the woman he would been having the affair with a couple months later. Salvador Dali was a fascist that beat women. Patton and MacArthur were pretty shit people too. Fun Dali fact: his parents had a child who died of gastroenteritis very early in his life. They named that baby Salvador. 9 months later, they had Salvador Dali. They gave him the same name, and on his 5th birthday, took him to the grave of his brother and told him he was the reincarnation of the dead infant. Ray Charles made children all over the place and refused to acknowledge them. Jerry Lewis. He treated his family like shit, cut his kids out of his will, and was a real boss on set. Watch some clips on YouTube of him and his behavior. Terrible. Most likely stemming from when he and Dean Martin split from being Martin and Lewis. Everyone thought Dean would disappear and Jerry would go on to be a massive star. As it turned out, it was the complete reverse. He was a bitter person. Hugh Hefner was, kind of not surprisingly, actually not a feminist and was more accurately a big misogynistic prick. Coco Chanel, revered fashion icon and also Nazi sympathizer. She was more than a sympathizer. She was an actual agent for the Nazis. She tried using anti-Jewish Nazi laws to get her Jewish business partners removed to leave her the sole owner of her brand. But they had outsmarted her before fleeing to the United States. They gave their majority share of the company to someone else who was not Jewish that they trusted. Chanel would use her place in high society to spy on all the other high society people and report back to her lover, who was a Nazi officer, if anyone was a possible threat to the Nazi party to be dealt with. So she was more than sympathetic. She was literally in bad with them. Henry Ford was an anti-Semitic bigot. Sean Connery said that women need to be smacked once in a while to keep them in line. Dig deep enough. Everyone is an asshole at some time in their lives. Not excusing anyone's behavior. It's just people being people. Mother Teresa was a sadistic bitch. She loved the suffering for God part more than the curing in the name of God part. The Vatican is trying to desain her. Stanley Kubrick. Although the way he treated Shelley Duvall during the production of The Shining is widely known, people who think there is nothing more to cinema than what Kubrick did tend to brush it off when they talk about him. He was well known for treating his actors like shit, but he has been glorified. The glorification is understandable, though not justified, to a point where his shortcomings are completely eclipsed by his popular persona of a mad genius. Alejandro Jodorowsky is a despicable human being. The guy had literally boasted, on record, of raping an actress during filming of El Topo. For reasons I don't understand, art film bros love to glorify that pos. It's high time we stop glorifying hollow and meaningless mental masturbation disguised as deep, cryptic and mystic shit. I don't remember his name, but there was an Argentinian soccer player who died, and people acted like, oh, what a terrible loss of a wonderful man, all the while ignoring that he was physically abusive to his partner. Maradona, was a drug-fueled train wreck for decades, and once he died, everybody forgot about the shit he did and only praised his legendary football skills. Charlie Chaplin was pretty much the Harvey Weinstein of the 1930s. His first two marriages were with teenage 17 and 16 at the time actresses from his films that he F-word, and got pregnant, so he married them in a hurry to save his public image. Had a second kid with each, no really raising any, then divorced them a couple years later. He was in his 30s. He went on to have relationships with very young actresses all his career. Got in a lot of legal trouble for denying paternity of kids. His last wife was also an 18-year-old actress he met when he was 54. They stayed together and had tons of kids though. Thanks for watching. Share your opinion in the comment, like and subscribe. It helps a lot.